Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming to our final keynote. It's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Henry Fuchs. Henry has been a faculty member here since 1978, so he spanned a good chunk of the 50-year history of the department. Henry currently serves as a Federico Gill Distinguished Professor of Computer Science. He's a fellow of the ACM and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. He's a member of the National Academy of Engineering and has been the ACM SIGGRAPH Computer Graphics Achievement Award winner, which he received for recognition for his outstanding achievements to high-performance parallel display architecture, much of which you see here arrayed in front of you. And recently in 2013, he was the awardee for the IEEE Virtual Reality Career Award. And if you've ever interacted with Henry or even just seen him, the blur in the building, you will know that the thing that's just a sheer delight about Henry is just his seemingly boundless enthusiasm for technology and computing. So please welcome Dr. Henry Fuchs.
Can you all hear me? Because this says red, but I'm sure that you guys can't hear me. We'll get fixed. It's so much fun to be here in front of you, and I'm honored by the department allowing me to get the last word in. So what I want to do in the next half hour, I realize I'm standing between you and Carolina barbecue, okay? So I guarantee you, we'll be finished, 12:45, we'll leave, okay? But until then, what I really want to do is tell you about some stories of the early days of how we got started in this, some of the travails in the middle, and how this interdigitated with the development of virtual reality around the country and around the world, okay? So it's a lot of things to do in 30 minutes, and I want to show you some of the stuff, okay? By the way, it occurred to me as I was writing these slides, of course like a few minutes ago, that like many of you, most of you, I should call out by name. It is so great. I look around and I think of the stories, the various things that we each did together. And almost every one of you, I could sit and say, oh, you know, how about that stuff where we did so-and-so? So, because we don't have enough time to do that, I would be grateful if you stood up just to be acknowledged by the other people that you were part of this. So anybody who feels he or she were part of graphics and VR at Carolina, please stand up, because I want to congratulate you. This is why I'm here. It's because of you people. Okay, so let's get started. For those of you that are not in VR, you might not realize, but just in the last 12, 13 months, VR has gotten hot again. It's like the universe has found this. There's virtual reality and virtual worlds. Okay? It's like I'm driving home 2 days ago from from here, and on NPR, not on NPR, like Science Friday. No. It's NPR Business Report, whatever it is. And they're saying, oh, the latest thing with Microsoft is this HoloLens holographic display. And they go back and forth between this. This is business? It's just amazing, okay? So how the hell did we get here, okay? Then I want to talk about what we have to do with it. And finally, for those few of you who are not involved, what does it mean to me? What does it mean to me as a person in society? Okay, so I want to start with 1965 paper by Ivan Sutherland. Fred mentioned this last night. For those of you that are not here, this was an enormously important moment, even though it may not have been recognized by many people. And I, given that I was in high school at the time, only heard about this afterwards. But in fact, I asked Ivan about this the other day, and he said, oh, I was roped into giving a talk. I was just tossed off. The major thing he said, and this is not captured, as Fred said, it's not captured in the little abstract, they made him write or something, was the notion that the display is not a set of line segments drawn by computer so much. Think about that display as a window into the world created by the computer. A window into the world. If we could have it ideally, it would look the same as a window into another world. It could have different kind of rules. There might be different ways that physics may work. It may do all kinds of things, but it could be realistic. He said a virtual chair. He didn't say how this would be done. A virtual chair you could sit down on. Virtual handcuffs would be constraining. Virtual bullets would be fatal. It was just an amazing thing. And Fred could testify. He was in the audience and had an effect on it. Okay? But the story that many of us don't know, in fact, I didn't know all the details of this till 2 days ago, is that in the same year, Ivan, who was at the time head of the DARPA's Information Processing Technologies Office, which is now enormous, but at that time was much smaller, visited Bell Helicopter. And he saw that they were thinking about putting some pan-tilt camera, like a stereo pan-tilt camera, on the bottom of the helicopter to help with night landings. He said they were thinking about infrared, and that they had gotten from Perkin-Elmer a stereo display that would go around the helmet of the person, controlling the helicopter, and then wherever the person would look left and right, up and down, that stereo camera rig below would swivel to. You understand? So they had just started this, and in particular, they did some experiments. So they put one of these things up in another room. In fact, he said it was on the roof. And then you could look at it, and they'd have person back and forth watching two people on the roof tossing a ball back and forth. Do you get this? And the person would be looking at it. And Ivan said, they said, when they tossed the ball at the camera, the person inside wearing the headgear ducked. You understand the significance of this? He was there. He said there was another experiment they did in which they put this on the roof on a tall pole and just told the person to, from the inside, look around, see the camera, the thing of Fort Worth, the skyline. It was fine. And then they asked him to look down. He looked down and he got scared. There was a physiological reaction, they reported. So what this convinced Ivan is there was something important here. Do you understand? The person felt he was in a different place. So Ivan said he thought, it's easy. All we need to do is substitute the computer for the cameras. It's done. He later said, I didn't realize quite how much work it would be to do that. But he left DARPA the following year, went to Harvard, and with a small team in '67, so 2 years later, he built the first head-mounted display. He gave the paper at the main computer conference, Fall Joint Computer Conference, titled A Head-Mounted Display. And I want to highlight this to you because, in my mind, this was the beginning of virtual reality. Not virtual reality in a science fiction sense. That's something totally different. Virtual reality, sure enough, built, displayed. You could experience it. And I experienced it when I got to Utah in '70, and it made a big difference on me. Okay, so let me tell you about this. It had the three major components that we are still working on that are in every single VR system today. Okay? And so why are people smiling, Doug? Because we know this is still hard today, right? So what we need is a display device, something to put on our head. Okay? We need some kind of tracking system for the computer to figure out where we're looking, right? And we need some kind of computer image generation system to generate that image fast enough so that when we move, it's sure enough there. Okay? Now, in '67, for those of you that are students but may not have been around, in '67, the state of the art was punch cards, or in some very special places, among them here, you could get some line drawing system that would draw a few lines. Okay? There were no real-time systems for realistic image generation for love nor money. Okay? So he built this thing, he with a small team. Some of these people are now famous in their own right. Bob Sproul, who's an undergraduate student, Danny Cohen, and Chuck Seitz. Chuck Seitz was at MIT. 3 of these people are members of the National Academy right now, right? Just to give you some idea of the caliber of people. So he got this display from Perkin-Elmer. He contacted them. He said, I want another one just like he gave to Bell Helicopter. They said $25,000. He got Model 2. To give you an idea, $25,000 at the time, that was like more than the budget of many of our projects, okay? It was like my entire NSF grant when I got one in '76, right? So there was a display device he got. These were CRTs. You could drive them if you had the vertical, retrace and stuff as black and white TVs, but of course he couldn't get a real-time image generation. So he had to have a tracking system he built from scratch. In fact, 2 different tracking systems. I would love to tell you, one of them was wireless, one of them was mechanical. Here it just shows the mechanical one. And the entire computer image generation pipeline as we know it today. So I don't know if Mark Lavoie's here. We were talking to Ivan yesterday, and Mark says, where did the 4x4 transforms come? And Ivan said, I don't know, I got it from Steve Coons, but I know that the mathematics goes back to like 1900, the homogeneous coordinates. He said, but what about, the transformation that, you just divide by perspective? He said, oh, we did that. That's why it's called a clipping divider. So, to give you some idea, this is the pipeline. Those of you that studied SGI systems later, OpenGL, everything, you will recognize this. Okay, here's this 4x4 matrix multiply, here's a clipping divider, here is line drawings, okay? Everything from small scale register transfer logic, 2 enormous racks as I recall. All of them done by them. Is that clear? Just a heroic effort. So, here's what happened. I don't have a slide about this, but I'll tell you the link to me personally. I heard about this system in 1969 when I was an undergraduate, taking an independent study from Alan Kay, who had just graduated from Utah. I said, this is so great. He said, well, you might consider going to Utah for graduate school. I made a beeline for Utah. I saw the system. It was really cool. If I had an extra 10 minutes, I would show you video. But it was just line drawings on it. But sure enough, it was in front of you. You could look at it. You could grab a molecule. You could move things. It was fabulous. Okay? The thing I didn't understand was Ivan had gone off to his company, Evans and Sutherland, that he started. He spent hardly any time in the lab. There were a few of us who were using this, but it's like, why doesn't the world beat a path to this door? It's like, doesn't everybody realize this is the future? The answer is no. Okay? No. If you want to know what was the impact of the 1968 paper, the first approximation is 0. You look at the textbook, the major textbook in the area, written by, in fact, one of his colleagues, Bob Sproul, and Newman and Sproul. How many have heard of Newman and Sproul? All the old people, right? Yeah. Do you know? It was the first great textbook. Does anybody know how many pages they devote to virtual reality and the head-mounted display in that textbook? I think 0 is a close approximation. I think they reference it. Now, the next generation great textbook, Foley and Van Dam, early 1980s. How many people have heard Foley and Van Dam? Isn't it a great textbook? I just love it. I'm a little biased. I co-wrote a chapter in one of theirs, okay? But great textbook. How many pages do you think they devote to the 1968 head-mounted display system?
The original or the second?
Ah, you see, yes. They have a little bit in there, like in chapter 19, on different kinds of weird stereo displays. But do they realize, as I thought everybody should, that this is the future, right? Someday, just like we're all going to have laptops, like Alan Kay said in 1968, I thought everybody will have these displays in their glasses. Isn't that obvious? Was it obvious to people Sproul and, Newman and Sproul? No. Was it obvious to Foley and Van Dam? I've asked them. He said, nope, wasn't obvious to us. So when you look at what are things that we did here, we did stuff because it was fun. Like, okay, so here are the ones that I can recall. Basically what happened when I got out in the 70s, you could not build one of these things, and the reason was you didn't have any of these 3 technologies available. I'm not going to build the real-time system from small-scale integrated circuits. I mean, just nuts. I'm not going to build the tracking system, in the late 70s, just nuts. And, am I going to go to PerkinElmer for, these CRTs? No. So basically, my guess is everybody else who was interested in this realized the same thing and said, sorry. But by the early 80s, several things became available. The first thing is that some companies, because they could build small CRTs and small LCDs, they started to market so-called pocket TVs. We bought some, Gary remembers these, Mike remembers these, right? And what we do, and we bought an Iconis system. Boys, Nick or Mary here? I mean, the greatest graphic system of all time? Of all time, maybe? Okay. Right? Of all time. It was so great. Okay, just to let you know how great it was, Fred and I went to their house, I think, when I came in 78, maybe January 79, something like that. They were then graduate students at NC State. They built the system, the prototype, could do everything so great, and it was so available. I remember we went out, we said, we don't care if they don't go into business, we still want one. We still want one. We put it into every proposal we wrote. We wrote 4 proposals the first year, and 3 of them got funded. In fact, where is Steve Pizer here? We wrote some. Do you remember we wrote some? We put it in there, and we got 3 of them, and we told them, we would take all our money. And they built us the biggest system, I think, at the time. It was so great. Okay, so Gary, did some software development, compiler for that, and there was a real-time digitizer on it. Real-time, sure enough. You hooked a video camera to it, it digitized it in real time in 1979, something like that. So we started doing things in which we generate the image on a little pocket TV. We couldn't build the head mount. And he would do this thing, ta-ta-ta. Okay? Like this, and you move it around, and the camera would detect, there's little lights on the end, and it would detect where the thing would be. Sure enough. Now, what Mike would say is, this really wasn't a head mount display system. Okay? But it felt great, I tell you. Okay? The other thing we did is Gary started off on doing, I'm a little biased for this, on doing a tracking system as far as I know, none other. He said, instead of having the cameras inside looking at you with lights, how about if we had cameras on the inside, looking on the outside, figuring out what's in the room, okay? And then as you move, it could figure out where you have moved a little bit, okay? Each camera would sort of tell you moved a little bit, and if you had 10 or 20 of them, then you could say, how much have I moved in order to account for these changes? It was a great dissertation, still needs to be finished, okay? But I mean, he finished it, it was great. It's just that, it's one of these things which is a 20-year project, and he did so much of it, he did 10 or 12 years of it, that it scared off every other person. They thought, oh, I cannot do the next one in this. So, I'll tell you about that later, but here, image generation. So, we did this stuff. There's other stuff that we did, there was this razor blade tracker that I brought from Dallas, and the first thing that Mike did, I think, was hook it up to the Grip 75 system. Do I remember this correctly? And we moved back and forth, and this is, in fact, I put it on here. Dun, dun, dun. This is what people later called fish tank VR, because as you moved around, the image, of course, changed, but it's not, you don't notice how the image changed. What you notice is you're looking at it from a different point of view. Okay? So this was really following on Ivan's vision. We're not thinking about the lines on the screen. This is a window into the world created by the computer. Do you understand? Fish tank VR. Not a very good name. All right, so the other thing that we did is how can you generate things, sure enough, real time, 30 frames a second? Well, by the late 70s, you could get these single chip micros. You all remember those, the ones old enough? 6800s, 6502s for not very much money. So the first thing we did was, hey, maybe what we could do is put 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 16 of them together. We'll divide the image space, and then we get 16 times faster. And so we did that kind of stuff, and there were little things on the board, but it turns out there's an overhead involved. And that overhead of doing the pre-processing eventually limits you. You know, Amdahl's law, for those of you worried about it, it eventually limits you, okay? So when that overhead is only half of the processing, and if you cannot divide that, you know, to figure out from this transformation, you know, what the delta values are for each one of those 16 processors, then even though 16 processors now do their part 16 times faster because they each do 1/16 of it, you still can't get it to be real time. The revelation was that a guy at Caltech, Carver Mead, had been taking the really creative idea. In fact, this was such a good idea that Ivan left Utah to go work with Carver Mead at Caltech. The idea is have people who are system designers understand how to lay out chips so that they could go all the way from conception down to the layout of the transistors, what he called tall, thin designers. He said, of course you won't be as good layout designers of the integrated circuit as the people who are specializing things in industry. You know, you're the chip, you know, for your ALU or your shift or whatever won't be as small as the one that you could get from TI or Motorola or whoever. But the fact that you could think all things through means that you could optimize through the entire system, so your total system will be better. That was such a revelation. When I heard him talk about this in the late 70s, I remember thinking, I wonder if I'm young enough to masquerade as an undergraduate at Caltech. I wasn't. But he had a colleague who came in the late 70s named Lynn Conway, and she crystallized this into a book, into a set of course notes that she went off and taught at MIT for 1 semester. And at the end of the semester, these students built chips that worked. I remember hearing about this, I thought, this is it. Now I and the rest of us mortals could maybe design chips. And if any, how many of you know Lynn Conway? I mean, she's one of my heroes, okay? Through Fred, I think I got a, you know, I talked to her. She was so generous. She said, of course you could do it. Take my notes. You guys could all do it. So in 1980, we started doing custom IC design. Anybody remember for that class? I mean, I had no idea what I was doing, right? You can verify, I had no idea what I was doing. We were using literally her notes, Xerox notes, in which she would say in these, she didn't plan to publish these. I mean, she had a book, but the notes were like, you know, notes, October 17th, you know, 1980. And she would have the name of the person, you know, it's various things. Here's, have this person talk about that. I'm looking at these, whoa, is this too personal? But what that meant is we could think about the overall design. And what we realized was that you could do the overhead and the parallelism all in one if you conceptualize this not as lines but as polynomial equations. Okay? Think about a triangle and how you could define it by 3 linear equations. And if they're the proper sides of the inside part or the outside part, and you say a triangle is just 3 linear equations, and if you're on the inside part of all 3 of them, you're in the triangle. It turns out that you could do this hierarchy of calculations so that by the time you get to the pixel, it's like all done. And that led to enormous gains. And John Poulton, I don't think he's here, just to praise John Poulton. He came up to me in the middle of this first course and said, after the first lecture on this, he said, this sounds a lot more interesting than what I'm planning to do for a course project. Could I do this instead? I think I had to be I had to constrain myself from hugging him. Oh, of course. And that started out the next 20 years of getting better and better systems. Okay? And what that led to is his chip at the end of that course. And by the time it got back, we had better ideas. In fact, the chip, just so you all know, the first chip worked in terms of the tester. Had 4 pixels, 2 by 2 pixels. The next one, Pixel Planes 2, in fact, was here. John Isles joined us, who was one of the other people. Is John here? No? But he also took the course. He also did a great job, and he joined us the following semester. And Selmo joined us. It was just fabulous. an experience. So there was a lot of things that were happening from 1980. Okay, so I think I told you about all of these. So here is what happened throughout the 80s. Okay, the display devices, these small ones, got better and better because it was gradually becoming more of a market. The graphics workstations, not just the Icona system, but in particular a Utah guy named Jim Clark took that same pipeline, that exact same pipeline that I showed you, and put it into silicon at about the same time we did pixel planes, and did the silicon graphics workstations. How many of you have heard of silicon graphics? It's like really great system. In fact, it was only because Iconis was so great that we didn't get the first one. Because Mike Peake said, why should we get this thing, from California when it is slower, it is more constraining, it doesn't do as many things, and Iconis is so much better in every way. Do I remember this correctly?
Completely programmable.
Yeah, exactly. SGI was a nice unified system. It did that pipeline beautifully, and it integrated it into a workstation. But it didn't have that flexibility, like real-time image input and stuff like that. So that's why we didn't get that. But here, and it turned out that there was a small company that made things for the military to track heads-up displays in cockpits, and so they were willing to sell it for a few tens of thousands of dollars. So by the late 80s, and there were people in other places, I should mention, there were people at NASA Ames, Scott Fisher, many of you heard of, Tom Furness at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. There were pockets of people, Susumi Tachi at University of Tokyo, some of you have heard. So there were pockets of people working on things. But the big change was in the late 80s when all these three things you can get together, and in particular one guy who was hanging around and knew MIT people and knew the people at NASA Ames, a guy named Gerald Lanier, put them together, and his company sold the whole system. And more than sold the whole system, he became the evangelist for it. Okay? As much as I'm totally inspired by Ivan went on to do lots of other things. And somebody would ask him even now, what do you think about VR? His answer would be, I don't know because I haven't worked in the field in 40 years. But Jaron Lanier was an evangelist. He said, think about these virtual worlds. Think about how you could be in a different body. You don't have to have just 2 arms and 2 legs. You could be a lobster if you want. You could be a tree. You could be in the world's just imagination is your only limitation. And this, he was able to expound in such a way that he was on the cover of Wall Street Journal. He was on PBS. He was all over the place because he was able to communicate to people this notion of a virtual world. Okay? Now, the 1990s was really great because media discovered it. Okay? The funding agencies. You wonder about funding agencies. Now, do you think when we went to DARPA in 1980, do you think we got a warm reception? I remember that Fred and Jula Mago and I went to tell them about parallel architectures, and the guy was courteous to us, but his bottom line was, it's a pretty crowded waterfront. And as we left, I remember Jula saying, that's it, I'm not going back there. It was so discouraging, okay? But by the 1990s, we sent in the proposal, hand carried it. This is a drawing of the cover of the proposal that Andre State. Andre's here somewhere, right? Okay? Do you remember this? Here was to DARPA. By the way, notice this. What this shows is if you're wearing a head-mounted display and you have some imagery from, say, a fellow there, a friend of yours, and maybe from some airplane, that you could see what's behind the hill, like some truck coming over. You could see through the hills, right? By the way, notice even though this was to the Defense Advanced Military Products Agency, we are not so military. Notice this is a truck. This is not any lethal vehicle, okay? But you get the idea, okay? DARPA was interested in this, NIH was interested in this, NSF was interested, they somehow understood. Because in my experience, you cannot just be too far out of what the general appreciation is. These are the same ideas as I recall we had in the 80s. But we had by 1990 is a bunch of things that we could demonstrate, and people understood the significance of this. So here is at a Paisano. I'm sorry we forgot to bring the head mount. This was one of the first video see-through head mounts designed by Donato Colucci and Curtis Keller and Andre State. I don't even know if any of the people are around, but this had the enormous benefit, I thought, that she thought, that you would only see the augmentation in the narrow field of view where your surgical site was, and so everywhere else, it was just air. So you could see your assistant, you could see the patient, you could see your hand, you could see you're holding up this needle that you're not going to stick your patient with. And then in the insert part was matched for what you would see, except you saw it in video. So you move your hand back and forth like this, and except for the latency, you would see your hand, and then this part in video, and this part you'd see it in real life. So back and forth like this. I remember one of the site visit committees when we first showed this, Ed Catmull was on it, who's now head of Disney Studios, Disney and Pixar Studios, and he had two reactions. First was, wow. But there is latency. And he was right on both counts. So the geometry we got, the latency we still have to work on. Then there were some people that wanted to do teleimmersion, like people with some more money, private foundations. So the 1990s were great. Now, what happened in 2000? Bad things happened in 2000. I was going to say VR winter here, but that would be too negative. What happened was, these were all interesting demo systems for the aficionados, but translating them into something that could make money was really hard. And so even the system that that VPL made was not selling very well. In fact, they went bankrupt. It was in 2000, there was the dot-com bust, if you remember. Then there was a new administration that didn't see, high technology and research as the vision of the future. And certainly not universities. They didn't see universities as driving engines. So DARPA changed dramatically. So there was steady progress, but it wasn't the same as the 1990s. Here is what happened last March. It was this way till March of 2014. In fact, if I looked it up, I could probably tell you, I think it was March 17th, 2014, one day. That changed VR. What changed is Facebook announced that they're buying a startup for $2 billion. People were stunned. Is that a reasonable expectation? We had the annual VR conference like 4 or 5 days after it, right? And I got there the Sunday afternoon and talked to various friends. And of course, everybody was talking about this. Like, are they crazy? This startup has no technology. This is the same thing everybody else has been doing. Are they either ignorant or deluded, or are they have visions of grandeur? What is this? And I was so excited by this reaction that I changed my talk. I was giving the first talk on Monday morning at 9 o'clock. Anybody there? Yes, okay. So, did it seem like I changed the talk? I think I mentioned it. I changed the talk, okay? And I said at the beginning, how many of you think that this announcement was good for VR? And about half the people maybe, or a third of the people raise their hands. And how many people think on the balance it's sort of bad for VR, this $2 billion acquisition? And about maybe a fourth or a sixth of the people, half the people don't vote, right? So you want to know what I think? I showed them the slide. The best thing that ever happened to the field. The best thing since Ivan Sutherland's head mount. No, the best thing since before Ivan Sutherland's head mount, okay? Because it's the first time that somebody is putting enough money into it to make a difference. Look at all the things we have done until then. Everybody was just cobbling together what was available technologies. Nobody was putting in enough money to really move the technological frontier. That clear? And that's why when the history of VR is written, I believe that the credit will principally go to that one decision. Win, lose, or draw. Okay? Now, 6 months later, Google announced they're investing, they and some partners, investing $542 million in 25% of another startup called Magic Leap. By the way, the questions about Magic Leap were the exact opposite ones from Oculus. By the way, here is the Oculus latest development kit. You can see it's nothing special, okay? It is a little tablet display, you know, and some optics, okay? It's not like great new technology. Magic Leap had technology they wouldn't even say was augmented reality. They would just say it combines holographically things. And you have to go read the patents and various other things because it's not at all clear, you know, exactly how they do it. We have some minor ideas. But then January 2015, Microsoft announced that they have been working secretly for years with a team that eventually go to how many people? Like 1,000 people involved, some large number, on a self-contained device called HoloLens. So now it's not just one company making what might be a foolish choice. There are 3 and then more companies that are putting in lots and lots of money. Now, why is this happening in 2014? I think it's one major reason. The consumer technology is now adequate. Okay? So remember how in the 1980s, for love nor money, you couldn't get it. In the 1990s, you could build systems, but the systems were just prototype systems. Now, you can have things that are really cheap, that are adequate. Okay? The high-res displays and small phones are pretty good. They're like, you know, HD right now. They're going to 4K, and they're quite nice. The sensors in them, the inertial sensors and the cameras are really quite good, and they're really cheap. Okay? The image generation. I mean, when we took things in 1991 to SIGGRAPH, and we had tracking. We had the image generation. You know, here is a Pixel Planes 5 board. You can come up and see them. We had a head mount that we built here because we paid a lot of money. In fact, as I recall, $75,000 to Tektronix for some really nice small CRTs. Okay? By 1991, you could build these systems, but they were enormously expensive. Now they could be cheap, okay, including the image generation. Okay? So will it ignite this time? My guess is it will. And the reason is that it's not tens of thousands of dollars, it's hundreds of dollars. What that means is instead of having a few pockets of interest here of rich laboratories, what you could do now is sell to 10 million, 20 million people around the world who can afford to have VR systems. Now, for those of you who are aficionados, the augmented reality systems, the ones that augment your view, like HoloLens or Magic Leap, I think is much, much riskier. Much riskier because the technology is much more difficult, and it's not clear that the early adopters have a good use case. Okay? So, what is there left to do? When I came here and talked to Fred, my fellow classmate Jim Clark had just left Santa Cruz and got a research position at Stanford, and I knew that he was interested in graphics and real-time systems. He had worked with the head-mount display at Utah, and I thought, boy, a research job at Stanford would be so great. You have all these resources there. You could just solve this problem. I told Fred in another 5 years, they could just have it sewn up. And Fred, to his great credit, said, there may be a few things for us to do. So, is there anything left to do now? All right. The first thing is, these promises have not been delivered yet. This is just promises that we think that they could do. There's no mass market products yet. So, how many of these? These are, it says, development kit, right? There's no mass market for this yet. There's just the hope by everybody that there will be, okay? The technological challenges remain on the image generation and tracking. And by the way, what the chief scientist here of Oculus was saying, Michael Abrash was here a couple of months ago, and what he points out, which I think is so true, is that we have a rich heritage in graphics of taking shortcuts, of things that are good enough so that they could be done fast enough so that we get away with them, right? Ming Lin talks about this so well. She's here, right? Right. You say, here is the simulation of turbulence. And she's the first one to say, we're not saying this is actually the way the turbulence is, but this is plausible right? Do I clear it properly? And that is what, all through graphics, that's what we do, okay? When we say this is texture mapping, we say it's not that it really has all the things that looks like textures there, but it's good enough so it fools us and it does fast enough. Michael Abrash points out, in VR, much of these are not going to be so easy because we won't be fooled, okay? Because we look around a little bit and, we just move a centimeter and we say, whoa, that glistening is not right. It looks like it's just painted wallpaper there. Or, the aficionados will say it's painted wallpaper, but the people who are customers will say, that's not right. So many of these things, from soup to nuts, will have to be rethought because our approximations will not be good enough, okay? Now, there's user interaction, there's 3D data generation. How are you going to generate the data that's going to be good enough for the immersive experience? It might be good enough for something on a screen on your table, but when you're immersed in it, you'll say, nah, this is hokey. It doesn't look like a person, it looks like something painted on some mannequin. Do you understand? So it won't be good enough. Finally, there's the eyeglass form factor, okay? You want to wear any of these for a couple of hours? Probably not, right? So eyeglass form factor, here is, if I had more time, I would sing you praises. This is the latest work of Andrew Maimoni, who's graduating next week. It is, as far as I know, the only one that has been demonstrated. This was a SIGGRAPH last summer. This is work with NVIDIA. This is the only one that I know that has been demonstrated in an eyeglass form factor where the imagery goes from one side to the other. You could buy Eyeglass AR displays for $500. But all of them have imagery that's right in the center. Okay? Now that imagery in the center may be okay if you're looking for a message, or you're looking to see, if I should turn right or left, at the next corner. But if you want something that is overlaid somebody, or you want to have something in which there's a simulated person here, then it's not going to be acceptable because you only see the little part of him or her, and then when you look to the next person, they disappear. You understand? So you need to have something that goes from side to side. The entire frame needs to be filled in. Is that clear? So this is certainly not yet done. Here is what I think is the great unknown. Okay, what use will compel 10 million customers to use this regularly? I'm sorry, it's too small. I had too many things to say, all right? Immersive video games, that's what everybody is betting, and I think it's a sure thing. If it's not a sure thing, 95% probability that immersive video games will be much better than they are now. And by the way, although I have a small relation with Oculus, even before I had a relation with them, I thought Michael Abrash and John Carmack were the key to this. I don't know how many know about Carmack and Doom and other things, okay? So I'm not in gaming, but I know enough that he's been in it for a really long time. I mean, how long? It's like Doom, he was aware of BSP trees. Everybody know that? So the guy really knows his stuff. And when he saw the Oculus first one, he said publicly to everybody who will listen, my next game is going to be in this machine. Okay? And he knows video games good enough that if he's going to build the next video game in the Oculus, I'm ready to buy it. And I think enough gamers are ready to buy it. So I think video games work. People say education. I don't know if education. Therapy, phobias, PTSD. Is that enough of a market? Sorry, no. Sporting events, do you want to be on the 50-yard line? Yeah, I do. The problem is that I want to be on the 50-yard line seats with Kevin because I like going to things with him, and I want to see him, and we want to talk, and if he's strapping this headband on, I'm wearing the strapping the headband on, it's not going to be such an experience. You understand? So I'm not sure about sporting events, okay? Now, there's entertainment like being on the stage with Paul McCartney. How many of you have seen this? You could now see this because there's startup companies all over that put panoramic cameras onto the stage, say with Paul McCartney, and then you could feel like you're on the stage with Paul McCartney. How many have seen those demos? Okay, some of you. Okay, now, here is my feeling. When I worry about it, I think that would be great. What I'm not sure is that's great after the first 3 or 4 experiences. Again, because I like listening to Paul McCartney, but I want to be with Susan, and I don't want to be wearing the strap thing, and I want to be able to, have a drink and eat and whatever. So I'm not sure about entertainment, okay? But I'll tell you what I personally think is going to be a big market, and that is films and movies. Now, this is all personal feeling about this. I may be totally wrong, and I'll save these slides in case you want them. I think action movies, I think, are going to be difficult. And the reason is, you first think you want to fly with somebody, and we tried various things, but you get motion sickness even if your system is perfect, because whoa, it's like, I don't want to be flying. You know, you're moving a lot, but your body knows that you're not moving. But what I think is going to work, this is again very personal, I think situations in which you're not moving, where there's a stage set, okay, and I think what that's going to feel like is being at the table with the characters. So here is one I was trying to think of. What are ones that we all know? Okay, what we all know is Casablanca. Okay, you all know Casablanca? Okay, and there's this famous scene, okay, the famous scene in which Ilsa, you know, who left him, you know, crushed at the train station, shows up at his place, at cafe, and then tells the pianist to play as time goes by. And then the pianist says, oh, I don't remember that. Oh, because he knows that he shouldn't be playing this. She finally says, I'll hum it to you. Da-da-da-da-da. It was so good. Okay, and then he finally has to play, right? He has to play. And his boss rushes over from the other room, says, didn't I tell you never to play that song? You all remember this scene?
Yeah.
I think it's one of the greatest moments in film. Okay? Made better that in the couple of seconds before the boss realizes, you see the effect of the song on the woman. She doesn't say a word. And she starts, and her eyes start to glisten. And then when the boss comes in, he sees her. Now, if that's such a great moment in movies, imagine what it'd feel like if you are there, you're sitting at the table. My guess is it would feel so emotional that you would feel like you're intruding on these people. Okay? That's what I think it's going to be. Now, this is what, so let me end with 2 slides. I realize I'm sorry I'm keeping you from this. All right, I have 2 slides left I want to show you, okay? Here is what's left to do for computer scientists. Basically invent the future. There's still no good HMDs, unless there's lots of work to be done, especially for eyeglasses. The tracking is okay if you're sitting there, but it's certainly not good if you want to wear it every day. You know, I want to wear it in my glasses every day, outside and inside. Image generation is okay, you know, if you have a PC and you have a great NVIDIA card, okay? But is it going to be good enough for this? And is it going to be good enough if you're generating it all day? No. So these 3 challenges are still there. The one that comes up that I think is really exciting is think about this as early adopters, like early part of film, to work with creators and artists on what the capabilities and limitations are. It's going to be like the golden age around the corner. Okay, so here's the last slide about why should we care as consumers? It might fizzle, okay? But it may be just another platform. Okay, it went from mainframes to PCs to laptops to smartphones, wearables. Yeah, but you know, it's going to change our lives. And the way it's going to change our lives, I think, is imagine what photography has done. Okay, how that changes art also, that all of a sudden realistic image painting is not the same. You can just take a photo of it, but there's new things about photography. So now this is not just like photography. It's like photography plus smartphones, plus hearing aid, plus watches, plus all kinds of things rolled into one. You have it with you all the time. You know, healthcare, think about how this is going to change, okay? So, Jump In is a great ride. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Henry. I'm sure Henry would be happy to answer a few questions. Down here in front.
Any movement from the lowest tech, like Google Cardboard, as making inroads into, yeah, it's the low tech, not necessarily the high tech version.
Did you all hear that? Absolutely, because what the low tech will do is, I think, create an enormous market. Oh, I should repeat the question. Do I see the low end, like Google Cardboard, helping this? And absolutely, if you don't know it, Google Cardboard is this free device that's literally cardboard with a couple of 10-cent lenses. You fold it up, you put your smartphone in it, and there are all kinds of apps that you could buy or get for free. It is so, write your own. It is really great. The only question, seems to me, and it's pretty well answered, that I was worried about before they introduced it is this good enough technology? Is cardboard good enough so people get a sense of enthusiasm, or is it going to be like, eh? But I think that what is shown is there's so many of them out there, so many people are enthusiastic that it is definitely above threshold. So people have a positive experience, which means they think, whoa, this is really good. Maybe I'm willing to spend $50 to get something a little better. Absolutely, I think it's a big thing. The only thing is it over threshold? And I think for many applications it is, because people are voting with their time. And app developers, all these apps that are developed for Google Cardboard.
Yeah.
Question over here.
Yes, just imagination of future application. And if I have this head-mount display and I have a phone with me and I have additional app on my phone, I just turn it on. I want to see Rome. There. I want to see Italy. I want to plan a travel. I want to see my home security system. Turn on the app. I want to see that application right there. I want to see around. Oh, okay. In the back, I want to see my car in the dark. You know, on the market, is that crowded? I want to book a train ticket. Is that enough? You know, head-mount communication with your phone, then you are on the move.
I agree, absolutely. I mean, how many of you use like Google Street View? You know, now, when Susan and I go someplace, before we go, we look at, see, what does it really look like? Not just the photos from that hotel, which always look great, but what does it look like, from the street? Sometimes we say, I don't know if we want, but a lot of times we say, oh, this looks like a nice neighborhood, right? Imagine what that happens if you, with Google Cardboard, you look around, you say, wow, this is great, let me look around here. It's going to be much better.
Maybe we'll take one more.
See, when you say one more, there's always like, oh, I don't know if mine is important enough for this.
The good news is Henry will be around. We can chat with him.
Okay, and you could come and see all this various stuff.
I'll happily explain it to you.
Yes.
So this concludes our symposium. Thank you again so much for coming. As Fred said last night, it is hard to express how much of a delight this has been to have everybody come back and to talk about computer science and research and the history. But it's not over quite yet. We have lunch for you in the Brooks lobby where it was yesterday, and it's Carolina barbecue. For those that are vegetarian, there's additional vegetarian options in room 008, which is just right around the corner on the west side of the building. So stick around, enjoy this awesome Carolina day, and when you're over having lunch, please say thank you to the staff. If they were all here, I would thank them once again for everything they've done to make this a fabulous weekend. The banquet was fantastic. The logistics have been fantastic. So actually some of them are here, so let's just thank them one more time. So again, thanks for coming, and let's go have lunch.